Welcome to NucleCast, the official podcast of the NY Deterrence Center. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, co-founder and vice president for research at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. The NY Deterrence Center is a 501c3 organization ensuring a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent and its ongoing modernization. Thank you for listening and welcome to the show. The views of the host and the guests are their own.
Welcome back to another great episode of NucleCast. Of course, as always, I am still Adam Lowther, and today we have an exceptional guest. Of course, I'm talking about Professor Fei-Ling Wang, who is a professor in the Sam Nunn School of Government at Georgia Tech University in Atlanta, Georgia, and he's got a new book, and I heard him speak recently, and I was like, man, we've got to get Fei-Ling on NucleCast. His new book, The China Race, Global Competition for Alternative World Orders. So if you haven't got a copy, it's a great book. Go get you a copy, read it. He makes some great points. Now, before I asked Fei-Ling there it is. Look at the copy of the book. There it is right there. Right. For those of you that are listening on the podcast, Fei-Ling just showed us a nice copy of the book. So go get your copy. Now, in the book, so welcome to NucleCast, by the way.
Thank you.
It's good to have
you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
To have you on. So you make some sort of provocative and interesting points in the book. And one of the things you say is that the United States absolutely has to win this competition with the PRC, because if we lose, the outcome is bad. Can you tell us about the points you make and what you think could potentially happen if China were to win?
Okay. First of all, thank you, Adam, for having me, and it's a great pleasure to be here to tell you guys a little bit about my new book. As Adam mentioned, this book is just out. The Chinese edition will be out this fall in Taiwan. I only wish it can be distributed in the PRC. As Adam mentioned, I do argue in this book and also in its two prequels. This is actually the last volume of what I call China Trilogy. The China Order, the China Record, now the China Race. So in this trilogy, especially in the China Race, I try to argue the United States and the PRC are in a global competition that is about the existence of both political systems, but the payoff is very asymmetrical. So for the United States, for example, if we win this China Race, or global competition, the PRC political system and its political pursuit may wither, may disappear, may go down. But the nationhood and statehood of China as a nation, as a country, as a sovereign unit in the world, actually will continue, may actually prosper more. But if the PRC won this game and the United States lost, not only the so-called American way of life, that is our way of governance, of organizing people, of organizing the economy versus the government, organizing individuals versus the government, will wither and go away, being replaced. The nationhood and statehood of the United States as a country, as an independent country, will also be affected to the point of withering away, disappearing. Why? Because my analysis, based on reading of Chinese history and what the PRC has been up to for over 70 years, is that the PRC is not just seeking a kind of position in the system as number one, as a leader, as a hegemon, whatever you want to call it. Rather, the PRC is truly seeking a systemic transformation of world order. That is, how the nations in the world shall be organized They could be organized more or less as equal sovereign units, as we have all been for 300 years, especially since World War II. Big countries, small countries, will all exist more or less as peers, as equal, right? That's one way of organizing. That is not a PRC way, or that is it's not a PRC wish. The PRC want to transform the system into a hierarchical world order. That is, one nation, one power, one government is going to be on top of all others. This is what I call the China order that has been in the Chinese world for about 2,000 years, on or off sometimes, right? This is also sometimes being described as world communist revolution, or sometimes described as world empire. Essentially, it's an autocratic, centralized, uniform polity for all, for everybody under the sun. The Chinese call it 天下, all under the sun. Because the Chinese, for a number of complicated but very deeply rooted reasons, as I analyze in my trilogy, have been thinking this kind of a world empire style of world political centralization, political unification, and autocratic by nature is the normal world order, whereas Westphalian world order, the Westphalian peace world order that we have been in for hundreds of years, the sovereign unity world order is quote abnormal. To cut it short, when the Chinese and the Americans are in this global existential competition, they are not just for the relative position of each other in the sovereign nation system. They are for whether to preserve or transform the current world order. So in that context, you all probably can now see that the payoff for both sides are very different. In other words, the Americans stand to lose much, much more, because we're not just going to be losing our way of life, our political governance, our values, we're also going to be losing probably as independent nation. Because by the Chinese victory, that means the countries around the world, the meaningful country anyway, around the world must be subjugated, must be organized in a hierarchical, uniform system. That suggests that not only the United States, but many other nations will lose their nationhood and statehood. So this, to me, is a game that has the ultimate stake, as high as you can imagine in terms of international competition. And that's why I've been saying all along that Americans must win. We cannot lose this thing. If we lose everything. Besides, what is kind of interesting is that I spent pages in the book and the trilogy as well to argue, analyze, to show why the American victory not only is in the American fundamental best interest, it also is the best interest of the world, including the Chinese people, because the Chinese alternative world order has been proven by history and by theoretical analysis as utterly suboptimal. That is, that world order, political order, is feasible, practical, maybe even more natural than Westphalian system, but it is clearly suboptimal, less desirable. So what Americans are fighting in this competition is not the best interest of America as a nation, as a one way of organizing people, one political system, democracy, whatever you want to call it, republic, right? It is also in a better interest of humankind, including the Chinese people. So that, to me, is the nature of the PRC-USA rivalry.
Well, let me ask you, to me, what you said makes sense, and it's consistent with my study of Chinese history. And I think, the Korean people, the Japanese people would all sit and listen to what you've said, and they'd nod their head and say, yep, that's right. That's right. But for many Americans, they have had this view of China and the CCP as sort of this benign government and a benign system that is just trying to maintain stability and bring the Chinese people out of poverty, and that there's no real malevolence beyond, hey, we just want to have more influence in Asia. So the story you posit is one that many of this, even the sort of the China community in the U.S., they would say, "Oh, you're exaggerating. They're not that malevolent." Sort of address that concern.
Okay, Adam, you have just summarized very well the rather popular, even mainstream kind of a dominant view, as you mentioned, not just among street people in the United States or in the West, but also among the so-called China hands, the sinologists, many of them, right? They would say, yeah, Adam, you describe is more like a fact. Fei-Ling Wang is talking about something that we don't think is the fact. In the book and in trilogy, especially in China Race, I spent pages and pages try to describe, report, and analyze why there has been such a American naivete or American ignorance, if you will, or American wishing away towards the PRC for a number of reasons. One is because we're Americans. We don't think the great power of China should pursue something that is different from ours, because what we have today in terms of world order benefits them. That's exactly precisely they become so rich and powerful. Why would they want to rock the boat? Right? We don't see that, right? But we don't really truly understand the experience of living under authoritarian dictatorship for not just decades, but centuries, right? That's a very different kind of internalized institutions. So we have a so-called different culture, different values. Most Americans do not see that as kind of, oh, there's a regime that concentrates so much power, want to alter the whole system, rather than just winning the game. In other words, the CCP and PRC are in the pursuit of altering the game, not just winning the game. It's almost like Olympics. You go there, you're not just winning the game. You actually win all the gold medals, and you change this game in your way, and hierarchically order who's going to be having gold medal, who's going to be silver medal, that kind of thing. They're not coming just to win the game. They want to take over, remake the game. So that's the difference. So in my analysis, I think CCPs, because of genetic, structural reasons, they are pursuing revolutionary change in the world to replace, reduce the United States as much as possible, whenever, wherever, with whatever, right? For two goals, two levels of goals. One is minimum, one's maximum. At a minimum level, they want to transform the world so much that their kind of autocratic regime will be secure and safe in the world. That's the very minimum. The CCP has been fighting for that for 70 plus years. They're still struggling. That's actually good news for Americans, right? Because they're not succeeding. They're still struggling.
Yeah.
But beyond that, they also see their ultimate security in their maximum goal. That is to transform the whole world in their image. That's called China Order or World Empire, right? And very briefly, in my book, I have analysis about the state of China studies or the status analogy, in which I argue for many reasons, including a peculiar racist reasons. Many American scholars tend to dismiss or ignore or hide this kind of a true nature of the PRC power on the world stage.
Yeah. They don't want to be perceived as being
anti-China.
Yeah. I mean, look, yeah, and then therefore you're a racist, or it's like whenever former President Trump said, hey, if you're from Wuhan, you can't come here right now. There's a problem. He was immediately called, racist or whatever. So that's a fair point. And I wonder how often, these fears of being called something negative, whatever it may be, for whatever reason, shapes the scholarship such that American scholars are far, instead of being panda sluggers, they become panda huggers, as they'll. So how would you say is, because you're part of the, China studies community in the United States. How accurately do you think the broader community is it, there's a guy or gal in here and there, that kind of see it together, and there's, a small group of you and you all get together and you have your own little cabal that, sort of understands it more accurately? Or are you a man on an island by yourself? Or how, and is the state of play changing as China becomes more aggressive?
Great. Well, I'm a kind of a sinologist myself, China scholar, guilty as charged. Actually, not too long ago, about 20 some years ago, I actually wrote an article in Washington Quarterly and also lobbied in Washington for Chinese membership in WTO, because I consider that was a great way to transform China peacefully. But unfortunately, just like Richard Nixon himself, and also his all of his successors, almost all of them, until Obama, they all have kind of neglected the two-pronged approach, which Nixon said many years ago. That is, we want to draw China into the international community, give it the chance to join us. At the same time, we must transform the PRC. We forgot the second mission. We forgot the transmission. We assume the transmission will take place automatically. Well, you just have to go to school playground to see the 5, 7 year, 8 years old kid, how much naturally they will adopt ethics, to be nice to each other, to share, to behave in a civilized way. Naturally, yeah, right. And they have to be disciplined, have been enticed, have been, socialized, convinced, pressured, oftentimes, and disciplined, right? Which one of us, how many of us have never been disciplined by our parents and teachers for behaving badly, right? If we don't discipline, don't force a little bit to assume the PRC-CCP will automatically transform by being just nice to them, seems to be a great failure, right? So to answer your second part of the question, I'm glad to report ever since the later part of the Bush administration and Obama, Trump, and now Biden administration, we see a formation of bipartisan consensus now in Washington. And in the field, the ground is shifting as well. Many high-profile leading sinologists still are hanging on to be sort of a panda hugger or panda apologist or whatever. They're still hanging there because this is something to do with resources, position, reputation, all that. Yeah. But increasingly many are changing. And we see lots of very good, excellent ideas coming out in the past 10 years plus. So it's changing. So I'm optimistic that Americans, just like before, will rise up to deal with this wonderful kind challenge successfully. Yeah, I have no doubt. Those tenured professors at high places, or former China hands who have benefited a great deal from being a friend of China, they are passing. I see that. It's happening. That's good news.
This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the Anwa Deterrence Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence. Yeah. Let me ask you, there is this sort of argument that, democracy hasn't taken root in China because culturally, almost genetically, the Chinese people have this natural desire for autocratic, strong rule. That's all they've ever known. Therefore, the reason the CCP hangs on is because they've made this devil's bargain with the Chinese people. Hey, as long as you support us, we might take some of your liberties away, but will provide economic stability and growth. And you guys know how bad chaos is. You've seen chaos in the past, and chaos is worse than anything we'll do. So therefore, the Chinese people have said, okay, we'll make that devil's bargain. Is that accurate, or is that sort of an inaccurate view?
That's a great, actually accurate view, but I will submit for you to consider, Adam and others to consider its incomplete view. And also,
Okay.
I would argue it actually is assuming that Chinese people are inherently different from us, from Americans, Europeans, and Japanese, and so on, right? I can say with no reservation whatsoever, the Chinese people, just like us, you and me, they share with us the same kind of fear, desire. They can do roughly almost everything that we can do. They also fail in where we fail. So they are humans basically. They're the same thing. If we gave them the information, if they are allowed to have access to their true history record, not the officially sort of a castrated history record, if they are allowed to think on their own, I'm very confident they will make roughly the same kind of decision American, European, Japanese, South Koreans, and Taiwanese have been making. Right? I have no doubt of that. For example, many Chinese students have come to the United States to study. Right now, we have 300,000 of them here. We only have like 800 American students in China, hugely unbalanced. But anyway, most of the Chinese students, as you know, come here to study STEM, science, engineering, and stuff like that. Yeah, they get masters, PhDs, and so on. But I submitted to another book for people to consider that we are actually doing a huge disservice to the Chinese student. Why? Because we don't teach them the technology, not how the technology was created and under what guidance the technology should be used. In other words, we don't teach them logic, we don't teach them history, we don't teach them social science and humanities, and so on and so forth, right? So their American degrees are incomplete. And that's exactly why many Muslim students from Middle East come to the United States to understand when they go back on the same kind of incomplete education foreign students, they went back, disproportionately large number of them become terrorists, anti-Americans. Same thing here, right?
Yeah.
So to say those Chinese students study in America, why don't they want to go home to push for democracy change? Unfortunately, they were not taught so. They only taught how to make great weapons, AI, EV, electric vehicles and stuff like that. They were not taught why those things were invented in the West and how should we govern them. Yeah. They were given fast cars. They were not taught well how to drive them and what's the rule on the road, right? And that kind of thing. So what I'm suggesting is that this is just one small example through giving the Chinese students a real American education. That's the incomplete one. By bring down the Chinese firewall, let the Chinese people have access to the information themselves. Chinese people will make the right decision. And the right decision with great probability will be the same as Americans have been making all along. That is to protect this least bad world order, to uphold the values, human rights, and democratic rule of law and capitalism and freedom of individuals. They'll do that. I have all the confidence, all the evidence to that's the case. But if they are prevented from accessing their own history to access information, they are not allowed to think on themselves. They are don't even allowed to speak freely. Those people are become guinea pigs in the laboratory. And the guinea pigs in the laboratory, after brainwashing, armed with the best technology they can get in the West, that's frightening. That's as frightening as you can imagine, right? It's almost like Frankenstein being created, right? And unleashed. That's scary.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I think back to whenever I was a graduate student and all my fellow graduate students were all Chinese nationals who had come to the U.S. And we would, have conversations and they would say, hey, listen, we're not communists, but we're staunch nationalists and we want the success of of China, of the PRC, because that's our country.
Sure.
And
Sure.
and they we'll fight for the PRC if that's what's needed. And it's interesting because initially I had thought that by coming to the US and seeing what we have, that it would reshape the way, these Chinese students who had come to the US thought. But there was actually a study done a few years ago that said that when Chinese students come here, they become even more enmeshed in Chinese culture because they read Chinese media, they don't change. They become more staunchly pro-Chinese because they look at American society and don't see that it's, attractive to them, which was something that I sort of was surprised and shocked by. And so I wonder, how your idea of sort of offering history classes and other things, even if you're going to be an electrical engineer or whatever, that might be that kind of thing that sort of breaks that shell. So it could put in, there's, think about the millions of Chinese students that have come to the U.S. over the years. It could do a lot to reshape it.
Yeah, fully agree, Adam. You have had accurate and a very sharp observation about many Chinese students after studying the United States, especially the majority who only study STEMs. The ones you have as a classmate probably are not necessarily in STEMs, maybe social science already, but they're a minority. They're definitely a clear minority. Majority come here to study STEMs, and they become very nationalistic. But my point is this: if they have learned the Chinese history, the real one, world history, American history, and logic and political science, and so on, they may still be nationalists, which is perfectly okay. See, the threat to America is not that China will become a nationalistic competitor with us. No, not a threat. Americans have competed with anybody, everybody, and we thrive. We never shy away from competition, right? Competition is a great thing. Why shy away from Chinese competition? That's fine. It is, they are being used as nationalists by a regime that is seeking to overhaul the system, overhaul the game. That's the threat. That's the danger.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, we're at that point in the show where we're getting short on time. So I want to bring out Bob the Genie. And as I rub my magic lamp, and Bob pops out, and, he grants all of our guests 3 wishes, but they have to be related to the subjects we've been talking about. Okay. So Fei-Ling, let me ask you, what is your first wish?
My first wish would be for an American leader, Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter, to stand up to the Chinese leader, tell the Chinese leader, like President Ronald Reagan used to say back in the 1980s, Mr. Xi Jinping, tear down this great firewall, then we'll live in peace, right? My second wish is for somebody who is willing to spend pennies, really pennies, to mandate social sciences, humanities, logic, Chinese history, and world history classes to all Chinese PRC students come here to study STEMs. And maybe for that matter, also other countries like from Iran or from Syria or from Middle East or from Latin America or from some other countries, right? To make the American degrees they're getting a real one, a complete one, right? The last wish I will have is that we can have a better control of our trade and the technology relationship with the PRC to the point we will maintain the same kind of semi-coupling, semi-decoupling situation that has been there since 1970s, but instead of being primarily on the CCP's terms, this time on our terms. That is, what to sell, what to buy, what to give, what not to give. We make a choice. We are more active rather than let Beijing to take the initiative, rather than let the greedy people on the Wall Street, a kind of a useful idiots in colleges, and all those kind of phony theorists to lead the show. Let it go naturally. Because as we know, naturally, we don't have market economy. We don't have democracy. We don't have withering water system. These two systems, none of them is natural. They are man-made or human-made and require constant maintenance, like our democracy itself. Can you imagine if we don't maintain it, the democracy will unravel because it is unnatural. It's man-made. The natural system is the tribal authoritarian regime, like you rule under the thumb of your father or your grandfather, right? That's a natural thing. So this is not natural. So same thing here. We cannot let a natural force to govern the U.S.-China economic relationship. We have to have some kind of deliberate thinking behind it.
All right. Professor
Fei-Ling
Wang, thanks for joining. Yeah, those are great. Those are great, great wishes. And, you're the first person I've ever heard say, hey, we've got to make Chinese students take an accurate history class so that they have a better sense of, where they come from and who they are. So that's a great wish.
Exactly.
I will work with Bob and we'll see what we can do to make these wishes come true.
Great. I hope that's
Fei-Ling Wang.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on NucleCast.
Yeah. It's great fun. Thank you.
And thanks to you, the listeners, for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you next time. Well, we had a great discussion with Fei-Ling Wang. He's an interesting cat. He's written, a great deal, and it's been interesting to see how he talks about his own evolution in thinking about the CCP and China, and separates the Chinese people from the government. And his part of his book, which I encourage you to read, is you got to get rid of the CCP. That's sort of one of the main themes. So if you haven't read the book, go read it. It's interesting. You'll enjoy it.
This has been a production of the Anwa Deterrence Center, a 501c3 that seeks to educate key decision makers, stakeholders, and the public to ensure a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent. Our executive producer is Kimberly Charrington, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Krumthal. Help us grow our followers by sharing it and follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast.